Welcome to About Scripture, a podcast designed to take the listener deeper into Scripture and biblical thought. And now, welcome to the podcast. I'm going to wade into international politics for a moment. I'll attempt to tread carefully, somewhat. On October 7th, hundreds of Hamas terrorists invaded Israel and killed hundreds of Israeli civilians, men, women, and children. The attack took everyone by surprise, including, tragically, the Israeli government. In a move that is certainly less evil, but almost equally surprising, is how many American liberals immediately issued statements of support for the terrorists. Not statements of sympathy for the victims, but statements blaming the victims for their own deaths. Such statements, in some cases, were published even while the attacks were ongoing. For myself, I was more surprised by these statements than by the attack itself, because terrorists gonna terrorize, but I assumed that people ostensibly committed to social justice would oppose the largest scale mass murder of Jews since the Holocaust. I'm glad to know better now. Some of the most egregious statements supporting Hamas were issued by students at American universities, including graduate students at elite universities such as Harvard and NYU and George Washington. In some cases, these student groups faced immediate backlash, including the loss of job opportunities, or in one instance that I know about that became sort of well known, the loss of a job already offered and accepted. Look, sometimes people do really stupid things, and supporting an international terrorist organization is a really stupid thing to do. I don't mind them facing consequences for their stupidity. They're young, and this should not define their entire life. If they change, if they stop being stupid. I appreciate the way columnist Ben Dreyfuss analyzed what his response is and will be to young people who supported Hamas. This is what he wrote. "It will not be hard for me to forgive a 20-year-old who, in haste, fumbled support for Palestinians generally into support for these evil Hamas terrorists on a Saturday morning before the true depth and breadth of the horror was public. If I run into one of them in a few years and we talk and they express regret, that expression will be enough. But the presumption of youthful stupidity that I grant people by default extends only to the end of one's undergraduate college experience. After that, the burden of proof shifts. If you're 25 and in law school and you defended Hamas and doubled down on it well past when it was clear how awful this was, I'm going to need to see more than an expression of regret. I'm going to need to see some actions that demonstrate you truly have evolved. I will want to see the picture of the tree you planted in Israel. Now to transition away from recent events to events that happened thousands of years ago. We are fortunate that the Bible presents to us many pictures of just the sort of transformation that Ben Dreyfuss called for. And Judah is a case in point. Judah makes an amazing speech in Genesis 44, and that is where we are headed. If we think about Judah from later history, this speech might not be surprising. After all, Judah produces Jesus. Judah produced David. Judah stayed true to God after the split of the kingdom. But all of that comes later, not in Genesis. Judah is born in Genesis 29, verse 35. He's mentioned again in Genesis 35, verse 23. But the first time he talks is in Genesis 37, verse 26. The first time he talks in the story, I'm assuming he talked at some point in his life before this, when he wants to profit from his brother's demise. His brothers were thinking of murder. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood?" The word profit, betzah in Hebrew, is always negative in the Bible. See a couple of examples in the book of Proverbs, chapter 15, 27, chapter 28, verse 16. It's not that Judah cares about his brother or that he's trying to prevent murder. It's that he wants to make some money off him. In the next verse, Judah says, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. Now, this comment could be interpreted as positive, but remember, Judah is also one of the brothers who plotted against Joseph just a few verses earlier in verses 19 to 20. Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. Sometimes when we read these words, we might think of it sort of like a cartoon, like these aren't real people. We might not think of them as flesh and blood. We might think of it more of like Veggie Tales, like it's a piece of broccoli talking about a piece of celery. At the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, my understanding is, I've seen this in pictures online. I haven't ever been there myself to see it, but there is a plaque outside the Lorraine Motel with those exact words. Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. You know, the Lorraine Motel is where Martin Luther King Jr. was shot in 1968. Thinking about it along those lines helps me put some flesh and blood on these characters. And we remember, as we think about this story, your enemies will be members of your own household. We remember that even the brothers of Jesus did not believe in him. John 7, verse 5. That's chapter 37, but once we get to chapter 44, we see that Judah has been transformed. If we look at chapter 37 and see the way Judah himself feels about his brother Joseph, and then we compare it to chapter 44 in the way Judah himself feels about his brother Benjamin, we see there is a drastic difference. We see, in fact, that Judah is still not the beloved son, and he still knows it. But somehow he has come to terms with that, with his own position in the family. Now, the text doesn't really explain this to us, but my guess is that his encounter with Tamar helped him come to terms with this, that is one of the reasons that Genesis 38 is in the position that it is in. And I will remind you of what Judah says in that chapter in verse 26. She is more righteous than I. That at least shows a bit of self-reflection, a bit of self-awareness. Fast forward to the end of chapter 42. The brothers are trying to convince their father Jacob to allow them to take Benjamin with them. Reuben is the oldest, and he sometimes comes across as, how shall we say it, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He actually suggests to Jacob, his father, that if Benjamin perhaps ends up dead in Egypt on this trip, that Jacob can compensate for the death of his son by murdering 2 of his grandchildren. I can imagine the look Jacob gave Reuben at that suggestion. Okay, Fredo, but no thanks. Listen to what Jacob actually says in chapter 42, verse 38. My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If harm should come to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. Jacob is talking to 9 of his sons, and he says, Benjamin alone is left. They all hear him say it. Benjamin is the only one that counts now, not the other 9. You notice he's completely written off Simeon. That's the kind of thing that the brothers used to hear about another one of their brothers, and it made them so angry they wanted to commit murder. They have a different reaction now. But in chapter 43, Judah is able to talk his old man into it. Look what he says. This is verse 9. This is Judah talking to Jacob. He's trying to convince him to let Benjamin come down to Egypt. He says, I myself will be surety for him. You can hold me accountable for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. Judah is taking responsibility. He comes to the fore. He becomes the leader of the brothers. In chapter 43, they do go down to Egypt. You remember that Joseph sees Benjamin. Joseph weeps. Joseph serves them all a banquet. He gives Benjamin 5 times as much. In chapter 44, he sends the brothers away. They still don't know he's Joseph. They think he's Zaphanath-Paneah, he is Zaphanath-Paneah, the second in command of Egypt. They don't realize that Zaphanath-Paneah equals Joseph, their long-lost brother. He sends his brothers away. He sends them with sacks of grain. He has his steward put his silver goblet in Benjamin's sack. Now, last time I told you my reading of this entire episode is Joseph's attempt to get Benjamin to Egypt and get rid of everybody else. That is his goal, and this silver goblet in the top of Benjamin's sack is, of course, essential to that goal, because the steward who put the silver goblet there immediately, when the brothers leave, chases them down, stops them, and says, why have you stolen the silver goblet? They all say, we're innocent. We haven't done any such thing. And, of course, the point is the one with the silver goblet is going to come back to Egypt. That's exactly what he said. In fact, look at what the brothers say. This is chapter 44, verse 9. Should it be found with any one of your servants, let him die. They are confident. None of us have the silver goblet. You're just making this up. But anyone that has it, he will die. Moreover, the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves. Now remember, Joseph wants Benjamin to come live with him. He doesn't want to kill Benjamin, so that's not going to fly. Like the brothers say, let him die, and he doesn't want the brothers to be slaves. He wants to get rid of them. He doesn't like them. He wants Benjamin to come back. And so listen what the steward responds. He said in verse 10, even so, in accordance with your words, let it be. He with whom it is found shall become my slave, but the rest of you shall go free. Now that's more like it, right? Not going to kill the one with the silver goblet. We're going to make him a slave, and the rest of you get to go back to Canaan. I never have to see you again. But they won't do it. The goblet turns up in Benjamin's sack, and then verse 13, then each one loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. At this point, we see that each one of the brothers, in fact, has changed quite a bit. When the goblet turns up in Benjamin's sack, the brothers could have gone back home, happy to be rid of another favored son, but they've learned from their experience. Or Uriel Simon interprets the matter this way. When the goblet turns up in Benjamin's bag, the brothers could have easily perceived this as the hand of divine providence releasing them from the oppressive burden of Jacob's favoritism toward Benjamin and justifying the sale of Joseph into slavery in Egypt after the fact. They could have interpreted God as showing favor on us, finally. They didn't. They didn't interpret it that way. In fact, they interpreted it quite the opposite way, that God is still holding them accountable for what they had done so long ago. They all go back to Egypt. Joseph again says, I don't want all of you here, just the one that had the silver goblet. Notice he says, verse 17, only the one in whose possession the cup was found shall be my slave. The rest of you get out of here. And then Judah stepped forward. He said, we can't do it. Judah makes this speech in chapter 44. It's an amazing speech. Coming from Judah, it's amazing. Just coming from anybody, it's amazing. The first half of the speech is a summary of the interactions they've had. Look, Zaphanath Paneah, we showed up, all we wanted was grain. You asked us about our family. We told you about our family. Then you started making these unreasonable demands. We fulfilled all your unreasonable demands. I don't know how the silver cup ended up in Benjamin's sack. I don't know how the money ended up in our sacks to begin with. We brought it all back to you. We gave gifts when we came back the second time to Egypt. But listen, verse 27. After convincing Jacob, we're trying to convince our father to let us come back. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me. And I said, surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have never seen him since. Let me just pause there for a moment. Judah is reporting to Zaphanath Paneah about what his father Jacob thinks has happened to his dead brother. This is the first Joseph has heard about this. As far as Joseph knows, I assume, he got thrown into a pit by his brothers and then sold into slavery, and nobody ever came looking for him. He never heard from his father at all. He has no idea what his father thinks happened to him. And this is the first moment that he hears what story Jacob has long believed, that Joseph was actually killed. That actually his father has been thinking about the son he thinks has died. He's been thinking about him for 20 years now. That his father is actually, because of the loss of Joseph, his father is just barely hanging on to life, such that the loss of Benjamin, even just taking him down to Egypt, is going to bring him close to Sheol. If you take this one also from me, and harm comes to him, you will bring down my gray hairs in sorrow to Sheol. Joseph is hearing about this for the first time. Now, therefore, this is verse 30, Judah says to Zaphanath Paneah, Now, therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became surety for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I will bear the blame in the sight of my father in all my life. Now therefore, please, let your servant remain as a slave to my lord in place of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the suffering that would come upon my father. Again, Judah recognizes he's not the beloved son. If Judah goes back to Jacob without Benjamin, it's not going to count. If Benjamin goes back to Jacob without Judah, it'll be better. And Judah is willing to live with that. Let me be the slave and not Benjamin. Judah, like all the brothers, has heard his father's exclamation, Benjamin alone is left. That's the kind of thing that used to drive him crazy, used to drive him to murder. Now, it drives him to sacrifice himself so that this boy who is bound up with the life of his father can go back home and his father will live. Uriel Simon says about this speech from Judah, his father's boundless love for another of his sons no longer arouses his rage and his aggression. He has come to accept it as a fact of life. Indeed, respecting it as an integral part of his father's personality. Here, in the presence of his 10 brothers, he is declaring that the fact of his father's soul being bound up with that of Rachel's son not only does not anger him, but in fact dictates that he take steps lest the imminent cruel sundering of that bond kill his father. Judah is now, for us, modeling Christ, as Joseph did earlier. They are both imperfect examples, of course, but they are examples nonetheless. Judah is offering to give his life in place of his guilty brother. Ben Dreyfuss said about those graduate students who had determined to support Hamas that he wanted to see proof of their transformation. He wanted to see the tree that they had planted in Israel. That's a good criterion, proof of transformation. Judah had done some stupid things in his life, some downright evil things, and we want to see proof of transformation. Even better than planting a tree is the offer to become a slave on someone else's behalf. The Apostle Paul talks about transformation in terms of taking off your former self, corrupt and deluded by lusts, and to clothe yourself with the new self, created according to the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. That's Ephesians 4. We are blessed to see an example of such transformation in the person of Judah. Thank you.